Oranga Tamariki staff and providers described difficult meetings trying to agree on the amounts to be recovered. We were told the meetings were particularly difficult when Oranga Tamariki suggested that a provider's reserves indicated that it had not spent money on providing services for Oranga Tamariki. You got too much in the bank because we saw it on the charities register. What's that 6 million doing in your account? This is fascinating stuff. So, staff also indicated that the concurrent restructure resulted in the loss of regional staff, loss of backroom staff, whose in-depth knowledge to providers would have helped with this process. Providers echoed these sentiments, and several told us that they felt that some staff that they dealt with had a poor understanding of their services and associated costs. So, staff, OT staff, that the concurrent restructure resulted in the loss of regional staff. Providers, who lacked the knowledge. Providers echoed these sentiments and told that they said some staff they had dealt with had poor understanding of their services and associated costs. So basically, you got rid of the people with the most knowledge and you put a bunch of cheap people, or you overworked a bunch of people that were already in the service, and it fucked everything over. It
Funny
just, the ball rolled. He also reiterated that some regional staff no longer had the same direction as they had previously had, for example, to allow funding to be redistributed from under-delivered services so that the same provider over-delivered. Oranga Tamariki staff and providers told us that despite statements about reconciliation and the recovery of funding being a business-as-usual process, it was clear that it was taking a starkly different approach to that taken in previous years. This is the current government. So this business-as-usual process was taking a starkly different approach to that taken in previous years. Staff and providers told us that Oranga Tamariki had not carried out reconciliation in a consistent or disciplined way for many years. We're going back with that. That's good. For example, we heard that previously Oranga Tamariki had not necessarily Oh, hang on. His promise that Oranga Tamariki had not carried out reconciliation in a consistent way for many years. Okay. Had not necessarily expected providers to reach 100% of all their agreed deliverables to retain all of their funding. Often took an overall view of service provision. For example, if a provider reported underutilization of one service line but overutilization of another service line, funded service, Oranga Tamariki generally allowed funding to be redistributed and did not seek to recover funding for the underutilized services. So that's what I was saying before. Got two buckets. They might take some from this one, put into this one. They did not seek to recover any funding from providers during periods of the COVID-19 pandemic and had a variety of contractual terms that often required providers to report little, if any, of their financial information and use of funding. So pretty lenient. I'm kind of not mad about some of these, though. We're talking about services that provide for children. And probably the people who are the most vulnerable in society. We literally in there, core services, domestic violence, sexual violence, vulnerable children and families, right? I personally, as a taxpayer, although pretty low taxpayer, I don't care if they take more than what they're like. I don't care. It's what? A couple million, maybe, if that. Maybe it's probably more like 100,000 here and there.
Yeah,
divided between 5 million New Zealanders. It's pennies. I don't care. Put it to good use. If this is a provider that's providing these services, I'm sure that money will go to a good place.
Right? Yeah, and I guess if they want there to be more, paperwork and proof on that side, what's that going to cost? More backroom workers who can process the paperwork. They don't want to pay for that. They've already told us they don't want to pay for that. And then, in cases like this, I would rather Oranga Tamariki have funding that it needs without having to justify why these people who are often in extremely traumatic and horrific circumstances. I don't care if there isn't as much paperwork there. I want paperwork, say, when it comes to housing and infrastructure and things that could actually impact a bunch of people. But yeah, I mean, this just feels like a typical thing, though, where they go, oh, these things that we're giving out for free, we've got to make sure that not a single penny of it is being misused or technically taken. Although the fact that we ignore all of this tax evasion and all of these other things, that's fine. But maybe some people who are trying to help children in horrific circumstances, or what, they might get a few extra bucks that they're probably also just spending on helping these kids. Like, it's such a fucking straw man.
There's only a wee bit more to go because I didn't get much further than this, to be honest. But what I did read, I was fascinated by some of this. It was great. The approach to reconciliation placed an immediate strain on providers who had planned their finances and those who use. So we've heard about this in the news. That's what made it to the news, is that a lot of providers were like, what the fuck is going on? The funding they received would do things like the cost of their staff contracts, property leases, and other running costs. Some providers disputed the amount that Oranga Tamariki sought to recover because they looked it up on the charities register, and its assumptions that their reserves derived from unspent Oranga Tamariki funding. For example, one large provider told us that Oranga Tamariki sought to recover hundreds of thousands of dollars despite issues that the provider raised. These included that the provider forecast that it would achieve, so the provider forecast that it would achieve 100% utilization for one affected service by the type by the end of 23-24, so the end of the contract. The information held by Oranga Tamariki about the provider's delivery and costs was inconsistent with the information that the provider held themselves. Another large provider said that Oranga Tamariki told them that as part of contract negotiations, it wanted to review their substantial reserves and how Oranga Tamariki would reinvest these funds. The provider's response to Oranga Tamariki noted that its service revenue from the contract with Oranga Tamariki was managed separately to its other finances. The provider also emphasized that its reserves had come from many years of good financial management. What? Oh, well, no wonder they looked at it sideways, guys. They wouldn't know fiscal responsibility if it slapped them in the face. Including asset management investment, and that it needed its reserves to operate safely in case of changes in funding. That's it. That's it for me. I don't care how much they got in the bank, because yes, if they're running these services, and I know this firsthand, actually, I know this firsthand because I did work for a charity, and that charity was able to survive on its own because it was run by a social enterprise. The social enterprise basically paid for the charity side of work, the charity work, the work that doesn't pay, the social service, right? And the only reason that they were able to be where they were and able to survive as long as they had and go through the pandemic was because they were propped up by the business arm. And they did not rely on the government every round of funding who would say, yes, no, we're going to give you 10 million less, we're going to give you 5 million more. Like, that's what fucked over so many of the charities that we worked alongside, because they just couldn't run. They didn't know whether or not they could run in 6 months. They couldn't invest in staff. Whereas the charity I worked for, we were sitting pretty because we knew we've got money in the bank. We've got assets we've been able to buy because we've been fiscally good and successful. Therefore, and like, they were very transparent. They're like, here's our running costs. Here's what staff costs. This is how much the charity is. And it was pretty balanced out. It was only after the pandemic that things started to go profit, which wasn't profit, it was savings that were then reinvested back into the charity work. But this is exactly it. This is why. It's because if you try and run purely on government contracts, every time it's a right-wing government, you get fucked and you can't run your service anymore.
Well, that's the thing, though. I mean, as Dr. Payenda has said too, though, is that the more we also funnel public money into private contracting, the more it's costing us. It's almost like we'd be better off having a socialized version of this that was just available and a lot better run. Like, could you imagine if we actually had services that would help with those wraparound things for Oranga Tamariki? I mean, Oranga Tamariki are doing not just social work, they're helping with psychological issues, mental health, family dynamics, like a plethora of confounding factors that just could be helped if we actually had socialized services that were well funded. I don't know, kind of like we've seen in some budgets from some parties that have the same color as my hair almost.